The airlock hissed as Captain David Cross stepped onto the alien starship Verax, a marvel of crystalline walls and pulsing lights that seemed alive. It was his first diplomatic mission to the Lirathians, a species known for their advanced technology and unique customs. As soon as he entered, David felt the stares. Lirathians, tall and sleek with shimmering scales that reflected the light, turned their glowing golden eyes toward him. He was the only human aboard, and he was wearing something none of them did: clothes. Captain Cross, welcome aboard the Verax, greeted the ship's first officer, Tylorix, in perfect English. I trust you've been briefed on our traditions. David nodded hesitantly, recalling the awkward conversation at HQ. No clothes allowed, they had said. It's their way of showing trust and openness. But no amount of preparation could ease the discomfort of standing fully clothed among a sea of nearly naked aliens. I appreciate your hospitality, David replied, forcing a smile. He wasn't about to strip down, not yet. Not until he understood why the Lirathians insisted on such an unusual custom. Was it just cultural, or was there more to it? Tylorix's slit-like pupils narrowed slightly as he glanced at David's uniform. We understand humans are slow to adapt, he said, the faintest trace of amusement in his tone. But on the Verax, adaptation is survival. You will find that to be true sooner than you think. David's smile faltered. What did that mean? As Tylorix led him deeper into the ship, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The corridors were quiet, too quiet for a vessel this large. Lirathians moved past them, their expressions calm but their eyes darting, as if they were hiding something. Then, as they reached the main hall, David noticed a pair of Lirathians standing apart, speaking in hushed tones. One of them glanced at him briefly, then turned away, their scales rippling in a way David had learned to recognize as stress. What's going on here? David asked, stopping in his tracks. Tylorix's tail flicked, a gesture of impatience. Nothing you need to concern yourself with, Captain. Our ship is in perfect order. But his voice lacked the conviction David expected from a first officer. As they continued, David's unease grew. The ship's beauty couldn't hide the tension in the air. Something was wrong aboard the Verax, and David suspected he was about to find out the hard way. The mysterious warning. The crystalline walls of the Verax seemed to hum faintly as David walked through the corridor. Tylorix had excused himself after dropping him off at his temporary quarters, a sleek room with smooth surfaces and an unsettling lack of privacy. David could feel the ship's pulse, as if it were alive, watching him. He paced the room, the unease from earlier gnawing at him. The whispered conversations he'd overheard and the stiff atmosphere on the ship refused to leave his mind. Something was definitely happening here, and it wasn't just about the clothes. Suddenly, a faint sound caught his attention. A soft tapping, almost like code, came from the air vent near the ceiling. David froze, straining his ears. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm. Then came the voice, faint and hurried, filtering through the vent like a ghostly whisper. Human, if you value your life, don't trust them. David's blood ran cold. He darted to the vent, pressing his ear against it. Who's there? What do you mean? He whispered back, his heart pounding. No response. The silence stretched uncomfortably, and David debated whether he had imagined the whole thing. But before he could dismiss it, a soft clinking sound came from outside his door. Carefully, he approached and pressed the manual override to open it. The corridor was empty, but a small metallic object rested on the floor. It was a Lirathian communication disc, glowing faintly with energy. David picked it up and activated it cautiously. A holographic message appeared, flickering and distorted. The image of a Lirathian he hadn't seen before filled the air, their voice trembling with urgency. You don't understand what's happening here, human. The Verax is not what it seems. They are hiding something that could destroy your kind. Trust no one. The message cut off abruptly, leaving David staring at the empty space where the hologram had been. His grip on the disc tightened. What could the Lirathians possibly be hiding? And why would someone risk warning him? His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp sound of footsteps echoing down the hall. Quickly, David pocketed the disc and stepped back into his room, sealing the door behind him. Peering through the translucent wall, he spotted a group of Lirathian guards passing by, their movements purposeful, as if they were searching for something or someone. David took a deep breath, his mind racing. Whoever had sent that message knew something dangerous, and now David was caught in the middle of it. He couldn't trust Tylerix or anyone else on this ship. But one thing was certain: the Verax was a powder keg waiting to explode, and David needed to figure out the truth before it was too late. The uncovered plot. David spent the next few hours pretending to settle into his quarters, but his mind was focused on the cryptic warning. Who had sent the message, and what were the Lirathians hiding? The glowing communication disc sat on the desk in front of him like a forbidden artifact, its faint hum a constant reminder that danger was close. He had to act. Carefully pocketing the disc, David left his room, taking care to blend into the flow of Lirathians moving about the ship. The corridors were eerily quiet, with only the occasional alien passing by, their tails flicking nervously. Whatever was happening on the Verax, it was affecting everyone. David remembered a critical piece of information from his diplomatic briefing. The ship's core housed a central database containing records of everything that happened aboard the vessel. If the Lirathians were hiding something, the core might hold the answers he needed. But accessing it was easier said than done. David approached a maintenance terminal, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. His training as an astronaut and engineer came in handy as he bypassed the basic security protocols. A map of the Verax appeared on the screen, showing the route to the core. It was deep within the ship, near the propulsion systems, and heavily restricted. Just as he memorized the path, a soft voice startled him. "You shouldn't be here." David turned sharply to find a Lirathian female standing behind him. Her silver scales shimmered faintly under the ship's light, and her golden eyes studied him with suspicion. It was the same Lirathian who had been watching him earlier in the main hall. "I was just trying to find the way to the dining area," David said, feigning innocence. "I'm not used to your ship's layout." The Lirathian narrowed her eyes, but then tilted her head as if weighing her options. "You're lying. But if you're smart, you'll listen to me." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're meddling in something dangerous. If you're caught, they won't hesitate to eliminate you." David felt a chill creep up his spine. "You know what's going on, don't you? Who sent that message?" Her eyes widened slightly, confirming his suspicion. She glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "Not here. Follow me." Reluctantly, David followed her through the labyrinthine corridors until they reached a hidden alcove behind what looked like a storage bay. Once they were safely out of sight, she spoke in hushed tones. "My name is Myra," she said. "I've been tracking a group of Lirathians on this ship who are planning something catastrophic. They've been manipulating the captain and the crew, using this mission as a cover." "For what?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "To activate an ancient weapon hidden within the ship," Myra said, her expression grim. "It was discovered during an exploration mission years ago, but its power is too dangerous to control. If they succeed, it won't just be your species at risk, it'll be everyone." David's stomach sank. This was bigger than he'd imagined. "Why are you telling me this? Why not stop them yourself?" "I tried," Myra said bitterly. "But I'm outnumbered, and most of the crew doesn't even realize what's happening. You're an outsider. They won't suspect you, yet." David tightened his jaw, the weight of the situation settling on him. "How do I help?" "You'll need to access the central database," Myra said. "If we can find proof of what they're planning, we can expose them. But it's not just the guards you'll need to worry about." "What else?" David asked, dreading the answer. "The weapon isn't just hidden," Myra said, her voice barely audible. "It's alive." David's blood ran cold as her words sank in. Whatever the Lirathians were hiding, it was far more dangerous than he'd thought. And now, he was right in the middle of it. The unlikely alliance. David stared at Myra, her words echoing in his mind. A weapon that was alive. The implications were staggering. "I'll help," David said, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his chest. "But I need more than warnings. What exactly is this weapon?" Myra hesitated, her shimmering tail flicking in agitation. "It's not fully understood, even by us. The weapon was discovered on a derelict world centuries ago, encased in a living biometal. It adapts to energy, evolves, and feeds on organic and inorganic matter alike. The rogue faction aboard this ship believes it's the key to dominating the galaxy. But if it's awakened," she paused, her golden eyes meeting his, "it will destroy everything." David exhaled sharply, realizing the magnitude of what they were dealing with. "We need to move fast. The longer we wait, the closer they'll get to activating it." Myra nodded. "The core holds encrypted logs of their communications. If we can decrypt them, we'll know their timeline and their plans. But the core is heavily guarded." David rubbed his temples, already forming a plan. "We'll need a distraction to draw the guards away. Do you have access to the maintenance systems?" Myra's lips curled in a faint smile. "I have access to more than that." She led him through a series of narrow, dimly lit maintenance tunnels that crisscrossed the ship. The hum of the starship grew louder as they approached its core. Myra explained the layout, pointing to weak spots in the security. Her knowledge was impressive, and David couldn't help but wonder why she had chosen to go against her own people. "You're risking everything to help me," David said quietly as they crouched behind a vent overlooking the core's access hall. "Why?" Myra glanced at him, her expression hard but tinged with vulnerability. "Because I've seen what happens when we play with power we don't understand. My own family died because of experiments like this. I won't let it happen again." David nodded, understanding her pain. "Then let's make sure it doesn't." Together, they devised a quick plan. Myra would trigger a power fluctuation in a nearby section of the ship, forcing the guards to respond. David would use the opportunity to slip into the core and download the encrypted logs. When the moment came, David watched Myra disappear into a side corridor. Moments later, alarms blared, and the lights flickered. Lirathian guards rushed past his hiding spot, their tails flicking in agitation as they barked orders to each other. David slipped into the core access hall, his heart pounding. The core room was massive, its walls covered in shifting crystalline panels that pulsed with light. In the center stood the core itself, a towering structure that radiated energy. Approaching the main console, David quickly connected a device he'd concealed in his uniform. It began downloading the logs Myra had mentioned. The progress bar crawled forward agonizingly slow as the alarms continued to blare. Suddenly, David heard a low growl behind him. He turned to see a massive Lirathian guard, his scales glinting menacingly in the flickering light. "You don't belong here," the guard hissed, drawing a weapon that crackled with energy. David's mind raced. He wasn't a fighter, but he wasn't defenseless either. As the guard lunged, David dodged, grabbing a nearby tool from the console and using it to deflect the blow. He managed to knock the weapon out of the guard's hand, but he knew he couldn't hold him off for long. Just as the guard recovered and prepared to attack again, Myra appeared behind him, moving with speed and precision. In one swift motion, she struck the guard's neck, and he crumpled to the floor. "Nice timing," David said, panting. "Don't get used to it," Myra replied, grabbing the device from the console. "We've got what we need. Now let's get out of here before more of them show up." Together, they fled the core room, the encrypted logs in hand. But as they made their way back to the hidden alcove, David couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever they had uncovered was far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. The real fight was just getting started. The chase. David and Myra barely made it back to the hidden alcove before the ship's alarms shifted to a more ominous tone. The deep, resonating sound filled the corridors, a clear sign that security forces were now actively hunting them. That didn't take long, David muttered, catching his breath. Myra had already begun working on decrypting the logs with a portable device she pulled from a hidden compartment in the wall. Her fingers moved deftly over the controls, her expression tense but focused. "They know we accessed the core," she said without looking up. "It's only a matter of time before they trace us here." David peered out of the alcove, his eyes scanning the corridor for movement. "Can you decrypt the logs before they find us?" "I don't have a choice," Myra replied, her voice sharp. "But it's not just encryption. It's layered with adaptive algorithms. This could take hours." "We don't have hours," David said. He pulled out a small holographic map of the ship he copied earlier. "We need a fallback plan. If they find us, we need somewhere to regroup." Before Myra could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. David's heart sank as the heavy footfalls grew louder. "They're here," Myra whispered, shutting down the decryption device and tucking it away. "We need to move." The two of them slipped out of the alcove just as a group of guards entered the area. David and Myra moved quickly but quietly, weaving through the labyrinth of maintenance tunnels. The ship seemed to come alive, its lights dimming and brightening in a rhythm that felt almost sentient. As they reached a narrow passage leading toward the lower decks, Myra suddenly stopped and grabbed David's arm. "Wait." David froze. Myra gestured toward a corner up ahead, where faint shadows danced against the wall. Someone, or something, was waiting for them. "Follow my lead," Myra whispered. She stepped into the open, her tail flicking behind her in a display of calm confidence. David stayed close, keeping his movements quiet. As they rounded the corner, they came face to face with a patrol of 3 guards. "Stop," one of them barked, raising a weapon. "You're under arrest for unauthorized access to the core." Before they could react, Myra moved with blinding speed. Her tail lashed out, striking one guard in the leg and sending him sprawling. She disarmed the second guard with a fluid motion, her agility unmatched. David, though less experienced, managed to tackle the third guard, using his weight and a metal pipe to subdue him. The fight was over in seconds, but the noise had surely drawn more attention. Myra grabbed one of the fallen guards' communication devices and smashed it to prevent them from calling reinforcements. "We can't keep running like this," David said, breathing heavily. "We need a way to buy time." "There's a ventilation hub 2 decks down," Myra said. "If we overload it, it'll create a system-wide malfunction. It'll disrupt their sensors and give us a chance to finish decrypting the logs." David nodded. "Lead the way." As they descended deeper into the ship, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The corridors were darker here, and the hum of the ship felt louder, almost alive. David couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just by the guards, but by the ship itself. When they finally reached the ventilation hub, Myra began rigging the system to overload. David stood guard, his ears straining for any sign of pursuit. The tension was unbearable. "Hurry," he urged, glancing back at Myra. "I'm almost there," she said, her fingers flying over the controls. "Just a few more seconds." A loud clang echoed through the corridor, cutting her off. David turned to see a group of heavily armed guards closing in, their weapons glowing with energy. "Myra," David shouted. "Got it," she yelled back. The ship shuddered as the ventilation system overloaded, sending a wave of heat and steam through the corridors. Lights flickered wildly, and the guards faltered, their sensors disrupted. David grabbed Myra's hand, pulling her away as chaos erupted around them. The two of them disappeared into the maze of tunnels, the encrypted logs still safely in Myra's possession. But as they ran, David knew the stakes had risen. The Lirathians weren't just after them. They were desperate to keep their secrets hidden. And whatever that weapon was, it was more dangerous than he dared imagine. The revelation. David and Myra finally found a quiet corner deep within the ship, far from the chaotic pursuit. The flickering lights and occasional tremors from the overloaded ventilation system bought them precious time. Myra immediately resumed decrypting the logs while David stood guard, his ears tuned to every creak and sound. The decryption device beeped softly, signaling progress. Myra's golden eyes widened as lines of text and holographic visuals appeared. She scanned them quickly, her expression shifting from determination to horror. "What is it?" David asked, stepping closer. "It's worse than I thought," Myra said, her voice low. "The rogue faction aboard this ship isn't just planning to activate the weapon. They've already started the process." David's stomach dropped. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," she replied, her tail flicking nervously. "The weapon isn't fully awakened yet, but they're using the ship's core to feed it energy. Once it's online, it'll adapt to its surroundings and become unstoppable." David frowned. "Why? What's their endgame?" Myra hesitated before answering. "The faction believes the weapon will make the Lirathians the dominant species in the galaxy. They want to use it to eliminate any potential threats, including humanity. But they don't understand what they're dealing with. The weapon isn't just a tool. It's sentient. Once it's fully awakened, it won't follow orders. It will follow its own instincts." "And those instincts?" David pressed. "Destruction," Myra said simply. "It was designed to consume and evolve, not to obey. If it escapes the ship, it could spread across the galaxy, consuming entire planets." David felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "So we're not just stopping a faction. We're stopping an apocalypse." Myra nodded grimly. "Exactly." The decryption device beeped again, displaying a detailed map of the ship. A glowing red icon marked the weapon's location, a secure chamber near the core. "They've locked it down," Myra said, studying the map. "But if we can reach the chamber and overload the containment field, we can shut it down permanently." David frowned. "Won't that risk destroying the ship?" "It's a risk we have to take," Myra replied. "If we don't stop it now, it'll be too late." Before David could respond, the faint sound of footsteps reached his ears. The guards were closing in again. "We need to move," he said, grabbing the decryption device. "We'll figure out the details on the way." The two of them navigated the twisting corridors, using the map to avoid patrols. The closer they got to the core, the more the ship seemed to resist them. Doors malfunctioned, lights flickered violently, and strange vibrations rattled the walls. "It's like the ship doesn't want us here," David muttered. "It's not the ship," Myra said darkly. "It's the weapon. It's waking up." As they approached the containment chamber, a deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through their bones. David could feel the pressure building, as if the very fabric of the ship was straining under an invisible force. They rounded the final corner and stopped short. The containment chamber loomed before them, its massive doors glowing with an eerie blue light. Lirathian guards stood at attention, their weapons drawn and their eyes scanning the corridor. "There's no way we're getting past them unnoticed," David whispered. Myra smirked, her confidence returning. "Then we don't sneak. We fight." Before David could protest, she lunged forward, moving with the speed and grace of a predator. The guards barely had time to react as she disarmed the first two with swift, precise strikes. David followed, using his wits and the element of surprise to disable another guard. Together, they overwhelmed the remaining forces, though not without a few close calls. As the last guard fell, David leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "You're full of surprises." "I've had practice," Myra said, already moving to the control panel. "Now let's finish this." She accessed the containment chamber's controls, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. Alarms blared as the doors began to slide open, revealing the weapon inside. David's breath caught in his throat. The weapon was unlike anything he'd ever seen. A pulsating mass of biometal floated in the center of the chamber, its surface shifting and changing as if it were alive. Tendrils of energy extended from it, connecting to the ship's core. It radiated a malevolent intelligence, its presence almost suffocating. "It's waking up," Myra said, her voice trembling. David stared at the monstrous creation, his mind racing. "How do we stop it?" "Overload the core," Myra said. "It'll sever the weapon's energy supply and destabilize it. But we'll only have minutes to escape before the entire ship goes down." David swallowed hard, steeling himself. "Then let's do it." With the weapon stirring and the ship itself turning against them, David and Myra prepared for the most dangerous phase of their mission. The fate of two species, and perhaps the galaxy, hung in the balance. The final stand. The containment chamber shuddered as the weapon stirred, its biometallic surface rippling like liquid fire. The hum of energy intensified, vibrating through the walls of the ship. David and Myra exchanged a tense glance. There was no turning back now. "Can you overload the core from here?" David asked, his voice barely audible over the rising noise. Myra's fingers danced across the holographic control panel. "I can trigger a chain reaction, but it's going to destabilize the ship. Once I start, we'll have less than 5 minutes to get out." 5 minutes, David echoed. Plenty of time. He tried to sound confident, but the pounding in his chest betrayed his nerves. The weapon's tendrils flared suddenly, reaching out as if sensing their presence. David stepped back, gripping a metal rod he'd taken from one of the fallen guards. The tendrils seemed to react, twisting toward him. "It knows we're here," he said, raising the rod defensively. "It's adapting," Myra said, her voice tense. "I need a few more seconds. Just keep it distracted." David didn't have time to argue. The tendrils lashed out, striking with terrifying speed. He dodged one and swung the rod at another, the impact sending a sharp jolt through his arm. The weapon was learning, testing his defenses. "Come on, you overgrown blob," David muttered, keeping his movements unpredictable. He darted around the chamber, drawing the tendrils away from Myra as she worked. Sweat dripped down his face as the weapon's attacks grew more precise. "I've got it," Myra shouted. Core overload initiated. The chamber shook violently as alarms blared. A deep guttural sound emanated from the weapon, a mix of rage and agony. Its tendrils flailed wildly, tearing through the chamber walls as it fought to maintain its energy supply. "Time to go," Myra yelled, grabbing David's arm. The two of them sprinted out of the chamber, the floor buckling beneath their feet. Behind them, the weapon writhed, its form collapsing in on itself as the core's energy destabilized. Sparks flew, and a deafening roar echoed through the ship. As they ran, the ship itself seemed to be tearing apart. Panels fell from the walls, and bursts of steam and energy erupted from the vents. David could feel the heat rising, the air thick with the scent of burning metal. "Escape pods," Myra shouted over the chaos. David nodded, following her through the crumbling corridors. They reached the pod bay just as another explosion rocked the ship. Myra slammed her hand against the control panel, opening the hatch to a small pod. "Get in," she ordered. David hesitated, glancing back toward the core. "What about the rest of the crew?" "They evacuated hours ago," Myra said. "The rogue faction didn't want witnesses." Relieved, David climbed into the pod. Myra followed, sealing the hatch just as another explosion ripped through the bay. The pod launched into space, the force pinning them to their seats. Through the viewport, they watched as the Verax tore itself apart. The weapon's biometallic form writhed one final time before the ship imploded, vanishing in a blinding flash of light. Silence filled the pod as the shockwave dissipated, leaving only the distant stars. David let out a shaky breath, turning to Myra. "That was close." "Too close," she replied, her golden eyes reflecting the faint glow of the stars. "But we did it." David nodded, the weight of their victory sinking in. They had stopped the weapon, prevented a galactic catastrophe, and forged an unlikely alliance in the process. As the pod's navigation system engaged, Charting a course back to human space, David leaned back in his seat. "So," he said, a small grin breaking through his exhaustion, "what do we call this little adventure?" Myra smirked. "Let's just call it survival." The two of them shared a quiet laugh, the tension finally lifting. The galaxy was safe, for now. But David knew this was only the beginning. Together, human and Lirathian had proven that trust and cooperation could overcome even the greatest threats. And as the pod drifted toward its destination, David couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for what lay ahead.